Okay. Today we start World War One, and as we often do when we're starting a new section, I want to take a moment to look back, to contextualize for a moment, um, and try and explain the situation in Europe that led to World War One. We're going to go back 40 years to the wars of unification of 1871. And we remember that, gosh, going back 100 years, in the Congress of Vienna after the Napoleonic Wars, a five-country balance of power was created in Europe, with five big countries that were all relatively equal, who would work together to keep stability in Europe. We also remember that this alliance, this five-country alliance, is kind of broken up during the Crimean War, when the Russians try and take more land than British and French are comfortable with. They fight each other, and no longer do we have this five-country alliance, but we still have five countries of very similar size and strength, and we still have a basic balance of power in Europe. Arguably, the Crimean War was meant to keep Russia from getting out of balance and too powerful. But in 1871, Germany unifies, and all of a sudden, Germany, which used to be Prussia, plus the German Confederation, which were those German princely states, come together to form a more powerful Germany. So powerful, in fact, that Germany becomes the most powerful country in all of Europe. And what we're going to find is that a new balance of power is created. And it's not created like in the Congress of Vienna, where they actually write it down, they plan it. It's not a planned balance of power, but what happens is that the English and French want to now join together. They had fought the Crimean War together, these historic enemies, and they want to try and balance Germany's power. Okay, Germany is really close with newly formed Italy, since they helped Italy get its land from Austria. So now we're going to find that Germany and Italy form their own little alliance. And of course, Austria, who basically are Catholic Germans, is going to find itself aligning with um, those countries as well. And then there's Russia off in the east. And the British and the French are hopeful that the Russians will join with them and we'll have a balance of power, a new balance of power, which is the Germans, the French, and the Russians, they're hoping, against the Italians, Austrians, and Germans, newly formed Germany. Okay, so here we have now this kind of new balance of power. Now, Russia's not really fully on board yet with the French and British alliance. Okay, but there's always the United States sitting over there across the Pacific, and the British and the French both feel really close to the US. The US is closer to the British and French than to the Germans, Italians, or Austrians. But the US is neutral and wants to stay neutral at this period. So now the stage is set. Okay, we're going to get into a section that's titled Causes of World War One. I'd know five if I were you. And I wouldn't use the names nationalism or alliances to describe a cause of World War One. If I were to see a question like this on the test, I would want to describe nationalism, describe the alliances in place. Using those two words alone is not, it's too vague to get you any points on any possible tests. Okay, so we're going back here. We're talking about the Congress of Vienna, the alliances that are formed, and we're gonna say that on the doorstep of World War One, the French, the English, and the Russians have formed an alliance they call the Triple Entente, and the Germans, Austria, and Italy's had formed an alliance we're going to call the Triple Alliance. Austria had taken control of the Balkans, and this is what brings Russia into the war. Let me. All right. So let's take a look at this map I just pulled up, and we're going to discuss this area right here. And the Ottoman Empire, we see here in this map in light purple, it had controlled all of this area in Eastern Europe for hundreds of years, like since the 1400s. They also controlled this kind of area of southern Russia. Russia had taken this area. And what we're seeing is that, all right, so recently, and when I say recently, I mean, around the year 1900, the Ottomans, who were weakening, had lost control over this chunk of land, specifically this little area right here, and this area here on the map. They were just too weak to hold it anymore. And the question then comes, who controls this land? Now, if you remember, the Russians were culturally connected to the Romanians, to the Bulgarians, to the Serbians. These were Slavic people who spoke a Slavic language, who had shared Slavic cultural traditions. In the same way, the Austrians and the Germans had shared German culture. And there's a little area right here that we're going to find. The Austrians, or the Russians, wanted the Serbians to control. Okay, they said, Serbians are our allies, and if Serbia can take control over this area right here, okay, then I can come through Romania, my Slavic cousins, or Bulgaria, my Slavic cousins, move into Serbia, my cousins, and then I can launch my ships into the Mediterranean Sea. The Russians, although in control of this area of the Black Sea, were not able to get their ships through right near the city of Istanbul, and to get their ships into the Mediterranean Sea. This is what's called a warm water port. The Mediterranean Sea has warm water. This area up here has cold water. The Russians could launch their ships into the Baltic Sea or the Black Sea, which is basically a lake. There is sea access, but there's just one little teeny area to get through, and the Russians didn't control it. The Ottomans still controlled this area. So the Russians were hoping that Serbia could take this land, which would then allow them to put a little port where they could launch their ships into the Mediterranean. It would really help Russia's economy to be able to do this. The Germans decided that the Germans and the Austrians decided that the Austrians should take control over this land that you see right here. This is modern-day Croatia and Kosovo. And within the country of Kosovo is a city called Sarajevo. Remember that, okay? But this makes Russia so angry that they felt that they got snubbed, that they didn't have a seat at the table when these decisions were made. The Germans made these decisions, the new super powerful Germans who were supposed to be friends with the Russians, but instead decided to hook up their cousins, right? The Catholic Germans, the Austrians, who had a very multicultural empire that we'll get into. They're not all Germans here. This is really the German area of Austria-Hungary, and then over here we're going to see that there's more of a mix. We have the Hungarian Empire, Magyars. But so the Russians then decide, okay, well, I am going to join with Britain and France. Okay, so now, because of this decision, we do have a Europe that is split into two alliances, the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. Central Europe, and then kind of the West and the East surrounding Central Europe. Austria had taken control of the Balkans. Russia also wanted control of the Balkans. The ethnic people of the Balkans, they wanted control over their own land, but they did not have a say in this. This is the same period when the Germans decided where the Europeans decided which European country would rule East Africa. So they were all powerful. They didn't care about what the local people had to say. And we're going to find that there is this new system of alliances. There's also this cultural nationalism. Now, this is important, okay, because the Serbians felt like they had not only did the Russians think the Serbians should control this area, the Serbians thought that the Serbians should control this area. They said, this has historically been our backyard. Why are you, Austria, all the way up in the mountains of Vienna, trying to tell me what's going to happen in my backyard? So the Serbians are mad, and this will be also a very important thing to remember. Also, underneath causes of World War I, we have this idea of militarism. And one thing that had happened in this period was that the Europeans had built up large armies. Now, the old saying is, and this goes back to the feudal era of Europe, even during the Crusades, 1000. Okay, so we're talking about how during the period of the Crusades, there was an old story that the knights of Europe had so little to do that the kings of Europe were happy to send them on the Crusades to go fight in the Middle East over the Holy Land, because they were getting antsy sitting around at home. And since Europe wasn't at war with each other during this period, they would oftentimes be a threat. Well, we're going to see in the same situation that during this period before World War I, the Europeans built up huge armies. And when you have a huge army, you oftentimes use it, right? You very rarely spend all this money on the army just to sit around and have them look at each other and then get itchy to do something. And even maybe you become a threat to their own countries. So we're looking at all of these European countries with these really big armies. War had changed also. We have the machine gun, we have cars. Technology had during the Industrial Revolution, electricity and telegraph for communicating. And these armies were big, they were powerful, and they were different. It was also a military draft at this period, where the Europeans were part of building the army was drafting young men and forcing them to fight, or at least to be in the army for at least maybe a few years in their late teens and early 20s. So militarism was also one of the causes. We also could say that there was an in general kind of fear of European governments that socialists were gonna take over. Okay, Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto had becoming more popular. Evolutionary socialism had brought many of these ideas into the governments of Europe, and the governments were not shy about the fear of socialism and the desire to make sure that didn't come up. Maybe if we started a war, the socialists, the clamoring of the socialists, right, would quiet down because of the war fever. So in 1914, Europe was on the brink of war. Serbia wanted to take control of the Balkans. Half of the Balkans is the country of Serbia. Russia, of course, supported the Serbians because they were cousins and Slavic, and they thought they would be friendly. And Austria had been given control. And here we sit. And Europe's what they call a tinderbox, one spark, one small little thing, and the entire continent could be at war, would be at war.